So, thanks to everyone for joining our webinar this morning. The webinar is around the connectivity puzzle beyond gigabit. So we've got some great speakers on the call this morning. I'm just going to run through a quick welcome and introduction, couple of slides. There's not a whole raft of slides, so don't worry, you're not going to be death by PowerPoint this morning. And then we'll get into the call proper and listen to what our speakers have to say. And hopefully this will be an interactive call, and we welcome questions. We're going to run through a range of questions with the speakers first, and then by all means please put questions in the chat window, and we'll pick those up in the Q&A session at the end. So without further ado, just a quick bit of housekeeping. So this session is being recorded. If your camera is turned on, I would ask, please can you turn your camera off if you're not a speaker, and put your microphone on mute. As I've just discussed, there's an opportunity for question and answer later in the session, but please do feel free to ask questions in the chat window as we go, and then we'll pick those up and answer as many of those as we can when we get to the end. And when the panel discussion does start, we recommend a gallery view just so you can see everyone and engage properly in the session. So who have we got here today? I'll let the speakers do proper introductions in a moment, but just briefly to say, we've got myself, I'll be chairing today, and we've got Deidre Oliver from Swansea Bay City Deal, Graham Pinfield from Perth and Kinross Council, Glenn Peacey from Hampshire County Council, and Jaron Tulo from Connect and Cambridgeshire. What are we talking about? What's this all about? So, digital connectivity, we all know, is an enabler to, whether that's economic growth, whether that's all of the social benefits that come alongside that. There's a huge amount of investment and focus on getting gigabit out to meet those coverage targets, 85% by 2025, at, as close to 100% as possible by 2030. We're all, familiar with those. In parallel, there's all the work going on with the mobile networks and the shared rural network. But it's fair to say that connectivity alone will not deliver all of the benefits that we want to receive from this. What we need that connectivity to be out there as the enabler. Absolutely, there's no question about that. But then it becomes, well, actually, how do we make sure that that's delivering those benefits? It's about, adoption of those technologies. It's about how they're used. It's about making sure businesses have the knowledge, skills, understanding to make best use of things like 5G when they come along. It's about making sure the public are using it and consuming it, and that it's affordable so that they're able to access, not only public services that are increasingly digital, but all of the other things for their own, well-being, and, certainly in times that we're in at the moment with cost of living, there are lots of benefits to being connected, and those are the things that ultimately we need to get to. So we've been doing quite a lot of work on this over a number of years, but certainly in recent months, and we came up with this way of visualizing this as this kind of digital jigsaw, for want of a better term. We came up with this because it's quite an easy way to visualize it, to digest it, to articulate it to other people who are maybe not so entrenched in these things as we are. But it just goes to demonstrate that actually, that kind of fixed and mobile infrastructure are two of the pieces of the jigsaw. But equally, things like public services, social well-being, the barriers to adoption that still exist, whether that's cost or skills or, confidence, all of those things, businesses being able to make best use of it. What comes after that? Is it, Internet of Things? Is that what we need to have everywhere? Is it smart places, so people can make more informed decisions about whatever that might be? So all of these things are just as important parts of the jigsaw, in some cases more important than just getting the connectivity out there, which we all spend lots of our time trying to do. I mean, in terms of how you solve that puzzle, this is just a really simple thing. You know, first of all, you need to understand where your area, you know, where whatever area you live in, urban, rural, you know, north, south, east, west. You know, it's about understanding what are, you know, the current status of these things. How much coverage do you have of the technologies? Are people using it? What are your businesses? Are your businesses on board and with using it? Once you've done all of that, you can identify where there might be some gaps still that might need some further work. That might need a bit more analysis to understand why those gaps are there. Is it affordability? Is it lack of skills? Is it still lack of availability? You know, which might be the case in some places. You know, and then once you've done that, we need, you know, people really need to have that clear, ambitious strategy and just as important, the action plan to overcome those remaining things, or to make, you know, best use of this technology that we've spent, you know, hundreds of millions, billions of pounds rolling out, you know, to deliver those benefits. And then ultimately it's about delivering projects, whether that's, you know, the market delivering things, whether that's, you know, UK government or each of the devolved national governments, whether it's, you know, those of us who are on the call, you know, who have a responsibility. You know, it is a shared responsibility to make sure that the investment that's been made, the time that's been put in, the money actually turns into those long-term end result benefits, you know, economic growth, stability, productivity, social well-being, etc., inclusion. So I said there wasn't many slides. Hopefully there's not been too many, and hopefully that kind of sets the tone and context of what we're doing here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen in a second, and then you can see all of our happy faces. And I'm going to switch over to each of our speakers today, and let the speakers introduce themselves. So we'll just go in the order that they appear on screen. So I'll stop sharing, and we'll hand over to Deja first. So Deja, can you just tell us, you know, a little bit about yourself and your role in digital, and you know, any initial thoughts you have about that kind of jigsaw puzzle and the different component parts in a couple of minutes, please.
So yeah, hi, I'm Deja Oliver. I work for the Swansea-based City Deals Digital Infrastructure Programme. It's quite a large region. We're Carmarthenshire, Pembrokeshire, Newport Talbot and Swansea, so it's quite diverse. In terms of the jigsaw puzzle, I think, yeah, it has to go beyond gigabit. Like I say, we're quite diverse, quite a rural area. So super fast as a minimum is what we're looking at. We need to understand more about where Project Gigabit won't be going. We're waiting on the data from that. We are very data driven in the decisions that we make, so we're reliant on the information we get from the national rolling OMR, and like once we receive the go list from Project Gigabit. We've also funded resources in each of our local authorities because we recognise that understanding that local picture is absolutely critical to delivering against this. And I think one of the key things for us as well is affordability. We've seen a lot of people taking or looking to use things like Starlink, but it's still quite prohibitive in terms of cost and skills. I could go on and on, but yeah. So yeah, thank you for inviting me. Nice to meet you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Deja. So Graham, you're up next.
Yeah, so I'm Graham Pinfield. I'm a team leader for Smart Perth and Kinross, working in Perth and Kinross Council, which is about an hour north of Edinburgh. It's quite a large geographical area, quite a rural area. We work on a larger city region basis with the Tay Cities. So the Tay Cities, 4 authorities, Angus, Dundee, Fife and Perth and Kinross, have done a local full fibre network project where we've connected about 186 buildings. I was actually recruited to do smart city stuff. So what Steve was actually talking about there, how we use Gigabit, is what the core of my job is really about, is how to use that connectivity, that infrastructure to actually deliver services better, to connect people better, and to do lots of things with technology. But so I've been doing the digital infrastructure off the side of my desk for many years now. But it is a complex picture, and you want to reflect when we go on into the discussion about, you know, where we've come from and where we are now, and there's still a lot of work to do.
Fantastic. Thanks, Graham. Glenn?
Thank you, Steve. I work for Hampshire County Council, and I've been leading primarily on the Superfast programme to date, and that has delivered infrastructure to 115,000 households across the county that otherwise wouldn't have it. We've got pretty high take-up compared to national standards, which is really the result of quite a concerted marketing and activity campaign to make sure people are aware of the infrastructure being available to them and the benefits that it can bring. I have to say, in a lot of cases, the communities are already aware of the benefits and they really just want the service to be made live. And probably the biggest hurdle we faced with the Superfast programme was that it stopped at 95%. I mean, we got to 97%, but that's 2.5% of properties without a service, and they are probably the most vocal and the most upset. And so Project Gigabit is really fundamental to fixing that problem, and we are very keen to see what we can do to make the last 2.5% closer to the front rather than to the back of the programme delivery, which is a challenge because obviously the economics make sense to deliver the more viable first. So that's a big challenge for us. And as a county, just to give you some context, there's 1.4 million people living here. That's excluding Portsmouth and Southampton. We're the 5th largest economic region in the country after West Midlands and so on. And we have just over 630,000 properties in the county. So if you use the 80-20 rule, there's a lot of properties to build to. And mobile coverage is an increasingly difficult subject as well. So it'll be interesting to talk about that later too.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Glenn. And last but by no means least, Sharon.
Hi everyone, it's Ceren Kululov from Cambridgeshire County Council. I'm the Program Director for Connecting Cambridgeshire. I'm currently leading the delivery of our strategy, digital connectivity infrastructure strategy, and responsible for driving the use of those digital technologies to improve business productivity and economic growth for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority area. When we have been given the title of this webinar of Digital Jigsaw, I constantly thinking about Jigsaw, and I thought the trick is the end result of that puzzle is the same. So local authorities, central government, businesses, operators, we all share the same ambition, how we can deliver that world-class digital infrastructure, required digital connectivity across the country. But everyone will follow a different way. One will build the frame of the puzzle first and will build towards it, and the other one will split into colors, and just think about a puzzle. So I think the thing here is we will all follow whichever is the best approach for us, depending on our priorities, our current situations, what is available, what is possible. What is really important to reach that end result is how we can share our learning from each other. What do we get from one jigsaw puzzle that we miss? And that is, I think, the last piece that we always value on. And I think this webinar is why we are here, to share our learning and to come up with that to-do list for us all.
Yeah. And that's a great point. That is, why we're here, so we can kind of share that knowledge, share our thinking, and that is vital, yeah, to get into that end goal. You're absolutely right. So I guess with all that in mind, there's lots of commercial investment in digital infrastructure, combined with the public subsidised programmes, Project Gigabit, the shared rural network. So does that mean that everyone will be connected, or is there still more that needs to be done in each of your respective areas? And if so, what do you think it is that needs to be done? And I'll pick up with you first, Sharon, if that's okay.
No problem. The short answer is no, and we all agree about that. It won't cover everyone. There are lots to do to support the delivery, to support the target, and beyond. But I think as we are all local authorities here, we all recognize the importance of digital connectivity over a decade ago. Glenn mentioned about Superfast broadband programs. We led the local delivery of Superfast and full fiber broadband in partnership with telecom operators. And Project Gigabit launched with their national mission to delivering how reliable broadband for everyone will be focused on UK. And different approaches being identified, voucher schemes being identified for this, which is supporting commercial delivery, local suppliers, national suppliers. But to accelerate that process, I think this is our role here, to accelerate that pace, to make sure that digital connections reach homes and businesses that in every part of the country, depending on range of things. And this is why it won't cover everyone, but we can support to reach that stage. And those things, for example, is the public and private sector investment availability, understanding the timelines of the rollout you mentioned earlier in your starter slide as well. And each program will have the targets. So voucher scheme have separate targets than commercial delivery. So we need to be looking into how barrier busting tools and processes are essential. So we need to make sure that those are facilitating the digital infrastructure rollout, because I think the important thing is we need to start stimulating the additional investment. And as local authorities, we shouldn't be stopping because we are not involved in contract management side of it. I think we should be supporting commercial delivery for them to see us as an enabler, especially to drive up the adoption of those digital connectivity, because they are. I feel like we are well placed as a central point between the government, providers, ISPs, and communities. If we have the right resources, we could then play a great role targeting those communities that may be missing out. And I think this is in terms of your question, what we need to do, it is to make sure the first thing we need to do is getting the political buy-in, that strategic leadership, to make sure that we have the resources in place in local authorities to support that, how we can support the current targets and beyond, to reach that everyone is connected.
Great, thanks, Sharon. I'm going to go to you next, Graham, if I can. So again, same question. So all of the investment that's going on, do we think that's going to be everyone connected, or is there more that needs to happen?
Well, I'm speaking from one of the most disconnected places in the UK. I mean, amongst the 32 local authorities in Scotland, and Scotland is the most disconnected of the devolved areas in the UK, we're in the bottom half dozen, really, in terms of connectivity. And given that we started this and looking at the open market review from 2012, it may be 2028 before some of our premises are actually connected. That's 15, 16 years after we started this whole process. So and we mustn't forget that why the market hasn't delivered, so when I look at that original map from the open market review of 2012, it was like 2 or 3 pieces in a 1,000-piece jigsaw of Perth and Kinross, where there was actually market activity from BT and Virgin Media then. So we only had in Perth and in a town called Blairgowrie some market activity where we'd already got some super fast connections. So ours is an area that really needs intervention, and that intervention has taken much longer than I think it should have taken, and we've still got a long way to go. So whilst I think UK government and Scottish government have done a great job to really take us from a low base, we started from a low base, and we've got real issues in areas like mine in getting everybody connected, and that's connected to FTTP, because it's not only getting everybody connected to FTTP, but it's looking at our future demands as well. So demands, this is EE's marketing at the moment. It's just about everybody that you've got in your household connecting, streaming, doing all of this stuff, and that's only going to grow. So, it's not only where we've got to now, which is good, over 50% FTTP, but we're only about 14% in Perth and Kinross FTTP. There's a heck of a lot still to do. And, every week I have a councillor or I have a community that have no idea still when they're going to be connected, and this really does impact upon their quality of life. So I think we can't be complacent about where we are. We're making good progress in recent years, and we've done everything that we can do, even though we don't have control over the procurement or the deployment. We're doing everything that we can do, including supporting some communities connecting themselves.
So that's a resounding yes. There is still more to do then. Deja, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree with both points actually, wholeheartedly, around the very hard to reach in the rural areas. Our rural is a bit like yours, Graham. It's very, very hard to reach. And I think the work that's being done, it's setting that expectation. People need connectivity, like you say, now. They don't want to wait 2 years. We're quite fortunate in Wales that we've got the Access Broadband Cymru scheme, so people can use that to look at 4G installations, like I say, something like Starlink. And we have got our support and engagement officers who are working with those communities and businesses. But as a programme, that's one of the next things we want to look at, is actually scoping that and understanding what can we do to support, how can we align our quite modest amount of funding to both Project Gigabit and then Welsh Government's very hard to reach plans as well, to try and get as many people as possible connected. But it's time as much as anything. People want it here and now.
Great. And last but not least, Glenn, what's your view?
Yeah, well, I very much agree with the comments of my three previous speakers. There's an interesting conundrum here, which is that for us as a local authority, we need to promote economic growth, and we want social inclusion, and digital connectivity is fundamental to both of those things. And central government has put in a huge pot of money, £5 billion, to deliver the gigabit and potentially the mobile rural services network pieces of those jigsaws for delivery, but none of that funding is coming in the direction of local authorities. And our own local authorities is, public record from 2025, we've got a £130 million gap between the amount of money that we receive from government and the amount of money we need to spend. And so projects like this become more and more difficult to fund, really, against the list of nice to have versus must haves. This is kind of falling further and further down that list. So I do think that there's a piece of work there for central government to look at, for BD UK perhaps to look at, in terms of how that funding envelope is distributed, given that so much of that funding is going to suppliers, which is good because they need to build the networks. But then they're still, local authorities are still being asked to get involved with that delivery process in supporting the actual delivery, so helping with barriers and all that kind of stuff, and then also promoting to communities, engaging with them for take up. We know take up is a really significant issue, particularly with altnets, and you're seeing a lot of market consolidation at the moment and a lot of refinancing, and a lot of that is driven by poor take up, because the altnets struggle with take up because there's not the brand recognition. And in those remote areas, local authorities play a huge role in promoting network availability and getting communities to actually buy into products. So, there's potentially a massive role for us to play, but we need to work out a way of making that funding more viable for us, to allow us to support those, the big projects that for the UK PLC is fantastic. We know that the rural economy is not just about farms. It's about accountants and designers and architects and all sorts of different
very much so.
Commercial activity, all of which is underpinned by digital infrastructure, and the ability of that infrastructure to abolish distance and make it possible to compete with people in urban centres, both in the UK and globally, is fundamental. And we've got examples of rural businesses that are supporting, for instance, agriculture with feed systems and so on, that allow them to maximise yield from particular footprints, which they can now sell globally because they have that high-speed connectivity. But it's very difficult for us to support those things if we don't have any funding available at all to make it possible. So that's kind of where I would sit currently in that space. I do think it's a worry that just specifically on are those properties going to be covered or not? Obviously, Project Gigabit's ambition is to get to 100% coverage. We've seen that Lot 27, which is the £104 million contract to cover 88,000 properties in Hampshire has been awarded to a supplier, and they're going to supply to 75,500 of the 88,000 that were offered. So that immediately means there's a 12,500 premises gap. And there's no immediately obvious way of fixing that gap. I mean, there will be, presumably, there'll be the voucher schemes and reprocurement, who knows. But at the moment, nobody's explaining what that opportunity is. And those 12,500 households are going to be really vocal about the fact that they're not included in any current plans. And you know, that will be mirrored across every other local authority in the country. So I do think, you know, I'm very hopeful Project Gigabit will deliver its 100% stated objective, but there seem to be some hiccups along the way that we're all going to have to get involved in dealing with the messaging.
Well, thanks for that, Glenn. I guess so. You know, very similar points there. You know, albeit with, you know, slightly different perspectives because of the different areas and geographies in which you operate. But I guess, you know, looking forward and optimistically for a moment, you know, if we get to the point where we do have, you know, everyone connected, and appreciate everyone, you know, might be kind of 98-99% of people, but, you know, I'll optimistically say we get to the point where everyone is connected. So what, you know, is that job done? What's next? You know, what happens with the other pieces of the jigsaw? You know, is where do you see your role in helping facilitate some of that, you know, achievement of those other broader ambitious goals, you know, economic, you know, productivity, etc., social well-being? How do we achieve those things? Graham, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. No, it's not job done. I mean, Glenn's mentioned take up, and take up is important. Get everybody connected, but we need to make sure that they're taking up the services. And you know, I think we've done quite well in Perth and Kinross. Our levels have been sort of above the Scotland average. But you know, it's in our interest as local authorities delivering services that everybody gets online, and because, you know, just as Glenn's been saying there, we just don't have the resources anymore to deliver the services that we need to in the way that we've already always delivered them. So that, together with every bank closures, post office closures, you know, everybody being forced to do everything online, means that we have to get people to be able to use the internet to do all of these things. And digital exclusion, it's been mentioned already. I think in a survey that was done a few years ago, we were shown to be Perth and Kinross to be moderate high in terms of digital exclusion, because we have quite an elderly population, and so I am concerned about people being digitally excluded. I wish we had more resources to put into, you know, supporting people and communities to get online. Our libraries do a lot really to help people, but there's a lot more that we need to do. We're particularly concerned about social housing now and social tariffs. I mean, there's been media reports about people, because of the cost of living crisis, actually ending their broadband contracts, you know, who feel that they just can't afford them anymore. So, and we're hopefully starting a project soon to get all of our social housing sort of connected, and we really need to push the social tariffs. And the market hasn't been good at promoting these social tariffs. You know, they're not well advertised and they're not well taken up. So that's a worry for us. So no, there's a lot more that we need to do on take up and particularly on digital exclusion.
Yeah. And Glenn, can we bounce back to you for a moment?
Yes, sure.
Obviously, you said many of those things, and Graham's echoed them. So, is that what you think? You know, is it about take up and digital inclusion? You know, is that stuff to do with businesses as well? You know, as well as the citizens?
Yeah. Well, the first point I'd say is that if it's available to everybody, that's a long way off. I mean, you know, even for a county like Hampshire, which is pretty rural, to be fair, but it's not North Scotland. You know, it's you know, there are definitely areas with low population density that are rural, but even so, it's, you know, 10 kilometres to the next fibre spine, so it's not a big deal to connect them in. And we're looking at the end of 2028 before the current contracts are delivered. So the availability picture is a long way off, I think, the 100% ubiquitous coverage piece. So we've got a job to do, to help people fill the gaps while they're waiting for that to happen. And I think, as Deidre mentioned, Starlink and things like that. So yeah, there are alternatives out there. We've found it difficult with 4G, to be honest. We've been really keen to promote it, and we have many residents who have attempted to go down the fixed 4G route, but they found that the products aren't as effective as they are advertised to be, from an availability standpoint, and reliability, and indeed a cost standpoint. So finding alternatives to a fixed line broadband connection is a difficult process. So that's kind of on the, you know, the jigsaw of, is that ubiquitous availability going to be there? And I think we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that even in the delivery of the contracts that have been let, we don't leave little gaps here and there. Once that full network is available, or even if whilst that network's being built, then I absolutely agree we have a huge role to play in ensuring that people are not excluded from accessing that network, be it from the standpoint of cost for buying a tariff, and there are the social tariffs that are, you know, we just posted about that because today is End Digital Poverty Day, and so we can bring some information about social tariffs and so on, and access to skills and learning opportunities that may be delivered through the library, or they may be delivered through other education establishments, or indeed private companies, but are funded by from the education budgets. So there's a good piece of work to do there, and as I think somebody else mentioned, sometimes the skills gap, it's not we need to get everybody to have a BSc in computer science. It's we need people to understand how to switch them on, which buttons to press, how to get it to work, how to do a video call. I'm a prime example of that, as my video isn't working today, so apologies. And you know, there are many things that we as local authorities will need to be involved in to make sure that we ensure that as many members of the public as possible get the benefits that they could do from broadband, and that's, you know, cheaper phone tariffs, cheaper gas and electricity tariffs, cheaper car insurance, you know, all of that stuff that perhaps we all take for granted for being online, not everybody can access. And it's typically the most disadvantaged who then don't access those things, who can least afford it, end up paying the highest tariffs because they're not able to shop around and find the best deals for gas, electricity, and so on. So yeah, I absolutely think we have an ongoing role to play here. I don't think it's job done at all.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Sharon?
I agree with the points raised. I think if you look at the question, if the job done, if you are looking as a target as a number, yeah, it should be done. But if you look at how we can optimize the benefits of connectivity delivered, then we need to explain what are those benefits. We need to list those, and we need to make sure that these benefits are wider, benefits are actually appreciated, like how we can realize those full potential, because communities, like we mentioned about rural areas, digital connected areas will be able to access education, jobs, health, social care, all of opportunities equally with digital inclusion. We mentioned about take up, and mentioned about that we don't do the demand stimulation activities as we used to be, because it seems like because we don't get the clawback from Project Gigabit anymore. But I think it is as important as how it was done before. We still, as a local authorities, we still need to go and talk to our communities to explain why, even if they have superfast, why they should be upgrading to full fiber, how they can benefit from those upgrades. And because commercial, especially commercial delivery, when they contact communities, businesses, our residents, I don't think they talk with the same language that we will talk, because we know our local area, we know our businesses, we know what they would need. We would be able to engage with them in a much better relationship, I think, than a commercial delivery. It will kind of like getting that credibility, maybe. But I think we should still support the take-up, as mentioned again earlier, because that is where the investment will come from. We support the commercial delivery. They will get their take-up, because so then they can invest back to digital connectivity. Again, we shouldn't see as like a money-making approach, I think.
Yeah. Great. And last but not least, Deja, what do you think? Is it job done, or do we need to do the things that others have said?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say everything that's been said so far, exploiting the benefits of it as well as local authorities. I think we're scratching the surface of digital transformation at the moment, and we have been for quite a while. And that is related back to the connectivity of our residents and businesses. There's no point transforming public services if people can't use them and access them. But we can probably go further. And I would say, I think we're part of the digital cultural change as well, that digital is not seen as an add-on, that it becomes truly embedded in everything we do. And it's about practical application, not always the art of the possible. But yeah, certainly in terms of inclusion, we've actually just recently appointed a comms officer to our programme because we recognise that we're not communicating at all, even what's available to people. But yeah, certainly the wider benefits as well of that connectivity brings.
Yeah, and I mean, you make a great point. I think, and actually, it's stated in the wireless infrastructure strategy that actually the public sector need to be a driver of innovation and adoption and making use of this themselves as much as the citizens and businesses. But I think businesses, there's still quite a bit to do there as well. I'm not sure. There are obviously pockets of fantastic things happening, but again, I don't think that's quite as universally applied as it could be across SMEs or even larger businesses for that matter, to make best use of this. So we've talked a little bit about these things as we've gone through, and each of you have spoken rather quite in a bit of detail about each of the regions that you operate. But what are the drivers for doing this? What are the drivers for connecting all of those various jigsaw pieces in your area? Is it is the council's focus on transforming public services? Is it because of the businesses and the sectors you have in your area and that they are making noise about needing this? Is it based on citizens being vocal with councillors? What are the drivers in your area that keep you going, keeping you engaged in this, that keep you guys obviously are still pressing ahead, trying to find ways of making things better? What is it that drives that? Glenn, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Steve. So they're myriad, really. I mean, you're absolutely right. One of the prime drivers is the number of questions we receive from residents via our county councillors and MPs asking what on earth's going on, and when will that network go live? Why hasn't it happened yet? That's the usual question. And is my house included? So that's probably the prime driver for sort of the information side, if I could put it that way, of the sort of continuing what used to happen with the Superfast programs in terms of being a source of information for the public. I think the wider issues around why we still need to be here, I think Deja pointed it out really well, actually. The switch to digital services and to channel shift is still, we're, as a local authority, we're still in the early stages of making that happen for a number of reasons around perception of the public and feeling that we can't offer those services yet because the public is not ready for that switch over. Some of the services that we deliver are really complicated and it's quite difficult to deliver them digitally, is another point. And then there's a perception within our teams that it's difficult to do that. So there's still that piece to cover. From an economic standpoint, I think the underpinning of the economy and the viability of our communities, particularly our rural communities that would otherwise sort of start to age and not repopulate themselves because everybody moves to towns. I think that's really, really important. So being able to attract younger people to move into rural settings and so on requires this infrastructure to be available and to make those communities viable, both socially and economically. And the point about mobile coverage, I think, is also really important. I'm seeing increasing numbers of inquiries from residents, councillors, MPs, parish councils and so on about mobile phone coverage. In the past, it would be a parish council getting in touch to complain that a mast was being put up. Typically now, we're seeing inquiries from residents saying, why can't I get a mobile phone signal? And so we're starting to do some work with a couple of the mobile network operators to look at what we can do to promote the installation of new masts, maybe do a bit of an education campaign with planning professionals to make them understand what the masts are for, why they need to be certain heights, the actual coverage that they will deliver and the benefits that brings to those communities, so that we can again help with that communications piece really with parish councils and residents. When a mast application does go in, well, why on earth do you need it, and why does it need to be so tall? And then looking at, again on the mobile phone coverage piece, the delivery of 4G, extension of 4G, and the new delivery of 5G, which is going to require access to public sector assets to make it commercially viable and to reduce the impact on the environment. And for us as a local authority, we have a PFI for our streetlights. So that's a really big problem, because all of the PFIs in the country have an exclusion clause that won't allow telecoms equipment to be installed on them. So we're working with central government, and we very much hope that they will support us in this process to come up with new terms for those PFI contracts, which mean that we can allow mobile companies to put that infrastructure on those lampposts, which is better for the environment for everybody, because it means we don't have to build new masts everywhere, and potentially is a revenue stream for the local authority as well, so that's helpful. But it means a change in terms of the contract, which is an expensive and difficult thing to do, and we know that the supplier of the contract would like to impose some cost on us to do that, and we're keen to avoid those. So yeah, there's a number of things still going on that are still really important for us to be involved in, I think.
Yeah, great. I'm conscious we need to leave some time for Q&A at the end, so I will come to Deja next, and then Graham, and then Jaron. But we've got about 5 minutes, so if you can talk quickly.
Well, I would echo everything that Glenn's just said. So that was, I think, well, our programme strapline is connectivity through collaboration, and as a team, we really firmly believe in that, going back to Sharon's point at the beginning about sharing learning, barrier busting, being here to support commercial rollout and accelerate that where possible. And yeah, leading on all the different programmes. So Carmarthenshire and Pembrokeshire very much focused on the rural and the shared rural network, and then Swansea and Neath focusing more around digital connectivity, infrastructure accelerator type programmes and that type of thing. So I'll keep it short. Yeah, that's still a place for us, I think.
Fantastic. And Graham?
Yeah,
what's the drivers for you
guys?
the
3 drivers, Glenn's covered them really, but we all respond to our communities and citizens probably first. You know, they're the ones that I prioritise as soon as they come into my inbox, and frequently we're providing an intermediary service between, you know, national government, Scottish government and UK government, you know, trying to interpret where they are in the programme, when they're likely to be connected, how they can help themselves get connected quicker. Secondly, it's about delivery of services. It's slightly worrying that we've been on e-government for a long time now. I can remember working on the first iteration, but the business case hasn't changed. It's so much cheaper to deliver services online, and we need to get as much online as possible. And thirdly, it is about economic development. You know, I'm helping small businesses working, international businesses working out of their homes, and particularly more so since the pandemic, who are working off a 2 megabit connection, and that's completely unsatisfactory, you know. So we do have a lot of rural businesses, and we need to get everybody connected, you know, from a business point of view, and many of the businesses we surveyed are not satisfied with their present internet service provider. So, you know, the market needs to up its game as well, particularly for rural businesses.
Thanks, Graham. And look, again, last but not least, Jaron?
I think I will say like what Deja say. Of course, I agree, and there is in Cambridgeshire County Council and by combined authority as well as our funders, is it is recognised that digital infrastructure is supporting employees for working from home. That means that it's reducing community levels, traffic congestion, so they can see the bigger benefits. but economic benefits for it is supporting the growth, creating jobs, driving efficiency. This is why they're all included in our Cambridge and Peterborough infrastructure strategy. So these are all the drives how we can make our communities connected, that have the access, equal access for sustainable growth ambitions.
Fantastic. And
5 minutes.
yeah, we've still got plenty of time, so that's great. So what I propose to do is maybe turn over now to the audience to see, have they got any questions about, that kind of jigsaw concept more broadly? Have they got any comments or observations, or or differences of opinion? We welcome all polite comments. So yeah, please fire away either in the chat or if you can put your hand up, then that would be great. Make yourself known, and we can try and get through some questions. If we don't have any questions, I've got a couple of extra questions myself that we can talk about. So does anyone want to go first? Has anyone got any questions, or do you want me to just ask the questions? I'm not seeing a flurry in the chat window, so maybe I'll ask a question in the meantime. And if anyone wants to ask a question, then please make yourself known, or put the question in the chat window, and we'll happily between us try and answer your question, or just give comment if it's a point that you want to make and it's not necessarily a question. So, we've talked about, bear with me for a sec, I'm just quickly reading one that's come in. Yeah, so if we could complete delivery to rural areas, what remains that would be transformational for urban, semi-urban areas? Have we got a view on that? Is it that, does it then become about all those other wraparound things? Is it about, actually making sure that the service is taken up, about making sure that, the skills, the affordability, is it that needs to be done? Or what do we think?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Apologies. So the question that came in the chat was, assuming we could complete delivery to rural areas, what remains that's transformational for urban or semi-urban areas? So, connectivity is all out there. What does that mean? And I can see Catherine's put a camera on. Do you want to unmute, Catherine? You can ask the question yourself.
Well, I suppose we have been speaking for a number of years about what do we do to get to the left behinds, and in Cumbria, some of those left behinds are in extremely poor sort of connectivity in states. But assuming that we fixed that issue, we do have the majority of people are going to be getting this gigabit full fiber connectivity. They're either going to have it within the next sort of 18 months or within the next 2 or 3 years, because that's where the commercial market's going.
Yeah.
That's where most of our people are. That's where most of our employment sites are. What remains that would be transformational for those major economic areas for us? Where would we go beyond just having gigabit there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. As I say, from my perspective, I think, having the infrastructure is to go back to the illustration of the jigsaw, I think is only part of the jigsaw. I think, I think it's the evidence that I've seen myself. I'm not sure that everyone is making best use of that infrastructure. So I think that, for me, that's where the activity needs to go. Once the infrastructure gets to these places, it's around making sure it is used. Now, that might be sector-based, that might be community-based, as we've talked about with disadvantaged communities. But I think, that's the thing that really delivers the benefit. Having the connectivity doesn't really give anyone a benefit.
Can I just come in, Steve?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a really good question. I am concerned about that, and I was discussing it the other day with colleagues. Just who is doing the thinking of the future, and this is what this webinar is about, really. It's where do we go from here? And when you think about how we're transforming our energy in this country and how all our homes are going to be changed and how we're going to have all of our smart meters and stuff, we're going to be having batteries, we're going to be having electric vehicles, and all of that needs to be supported by digital. Plus we've got, the amount of bandwidth that we're all consuming at the moment, the increasing amount of devices that we have connected, the Internet of Things. What worries me is how do we future-proof ourselves in the future? Because I think we've only got part of the way from where we will be, where we need to be in the next 5 to 10 years. So I'd like to be reassured that UK government and Scottish government are actually thinking about this. How do we meet the demands of the future? And we need to look at Korea and Japan and places like that, and look at what they're doing, because they're way ahead of us on this.
And I think 5G, to pick up on one of the other comments in the chat, I think 5G is a great example of that, because 5G is being rolled out. To be blunt, I think it's marketed at the moment as a kind of faster connection, for consumers. I don't think there's really, been those really compelling, wide scale, large national deployments of use cases, for businesses. So, and I know there's lots of work going on, and both through the innovation regions and other work that the UK government are doing to try and get people like the public sector to help develop and and evidence those use cases. But I think, to your point, I think, there's, until we have connectivity in lots of these places, the fantastic use cases and the real long-term benefits that we achieve, we won't even know some of those yet. Yes, we need to be thinking about them, and yes, there's work doing to try and do some of those early wins and inform that. But yes, we need to get the connectivity out. But yes, we then do need to think about, exactly that. How do we evidence those things?
But I do, Steve, just to pick up on that, I do think that the decision to go for full fibre and to make full fibre available across the country to as close to 100% of properties as possible is really significant part of that future-proofing piece, because there are always calls for people to find shortcuts, to say, oh well, 5G will fix this, or back when they started out the super fast rollout, everybody said 3G could do it instead, or you could do it with 4G, and the reality is those pieces of kit sit at the end of the network, but you've got to have the core network in place to be able to support all of those new developments that come along. And as we know, 4G is in the process. 4G hasn't even been finished yet. We haven't finished rolling out 4G. There's nowhere near ubiquitous 4G coverage, certainly not in our county, and I doubt very much in anybody else's. And we're already seeing gaps in urban centres where there's not enough capacity to deliver the 4G that residents are requesting. And now we're talking about 5G, which is great, and we should have it, and it's going to be important. And I'm sure it will help, particularly with transport, because driverless cars in particular, and managing traffic networks will become much easier when you've got ubiquitous 5G coverage. But those things are the add-ons, and who knows what 6G will bring when it comes. And I really think it's important that we get across the message that you have to do the hard work and put the full fibre in the ground and make sure it's available to every property, so that they can connect onto it, whatever the latest thing will be, 5G, 6G, 7G, Wi-Fi 8, whatever it's going to be, because you have to have that core infrastructure to underpin it. Without it, your 5G is pointless if you can't connect the 5G aerial to some fibre. It just, it won't deliver the benefits that you think you can get. So I think there's a messaging there that we need to make sure gets out.
I think as well there's the point of, I mean, yes, there are alternative connections. There is 5G. I mean, we can't really talk about 6G yet, because the standards aren't ratified, and certainly no one's talking about rolling that out anytime soon. En masse. So I think, just thinking about 5G for a moment, of course, we've got low Earth orbit satellites, the likes of Starlink and OneWeb and Amazon's offer when it comes to fruition. So that there are a blend of technologies that can keep people connected, but it's not just about the technology, the speed that can be delivered, the latency and all the other things that are important. It is about that a quality of cost parity as well. And at the moment, Deja made the point earlier that a Starlink solution, whilst can deliver a good service, I have no doubt, is not really cost parity with a solution that someone can get from a fiber or FTTC provider even. 5G is similar. At the moment, yes, it could deliver the speed. The really high speeds are quite short range. That would be quite difficult to roll out in the rural areas for all the reasons we know and love. Even if it could be, the costs are still probably going to be not on par with some of the fixed connectivity. So, I accept that there are a variety of connectivity types, but it's about equality and making sure it's accessible to people. Because to go back to the jigsaw and just to kind of wrap up as we're right at the end of the call now, connectivity alone, there are a couple of pieces of this jigsaw. The rest of the jigsaw is about how we make the absolute best use of the connectivity that we've all spent so much time and effort making sure is deployed. It's only by doing all of the bits of the jigsaw. We might do a little bit more of one in one area, a little bit more of another in another area, depending on local needs and local priority. But we still need the full picture to be completed, that whole jigsaw, so that we get the kind of long running benefit into the future. So I guess with that, we're at the very end of our call now. I want to thank our speakers for their valuable contributions, as always. It's always great to get the views of people who are actually out doing this in real life, and just to thank all of the people who've attended and listened. Hopefully you've found it interesting. Hopefully it's given you some food for thought, and maybe you can think about how this applies within your area, and ultimately what you can do to contribute to filling in that jigsaw would be fantastic. So with that, I will close, and as I say, thanks to everyone for both attending, and a really, really big thanks to those who've spoken today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Very enjoyable.
Thank you.